As promised, I'm doing a Q&A of a lot of the questions that I got throughout the sourdough course, the fresh milled sourdough course. And I had so many questions, I can't answer them all in this video. So what I did is I went through and picked the ones that got asked over and over again, and that way hopefully I'll answer most of them, and maybe I will do another one of these to kind of add into the course in a week or two. So if I don't answer your question, there's a good chance I'll answer it just a little bit later on, or you can ask it again in the comment section of this video and I'll answer you down there. So the course was great. I am so excited for how many people took part in it, and I'm really glad that I decided to do it over here on YouTube instead of making a whole course on a website and, you know, all that. This worked out so well because I feel like having the comments really helps the community as far as, you know, if you have a question, I try to get to you. I know I don't get to all the questions, and I'm sorry. It's really hard to get to all of them. But I felt like that it was just a really, really successful course, and I'm so grateful to you all for taking part in it. And I'm already starting to see some of your loaves of bread over in our sourdough, fresh milled sourdough group. If you're not part of that, go down in the description box and click on that link and ask to join, and we'd be glad to have you. All right, well, I have a list of questions here, and I'm going to answer them in no particular order, but these are questions that I got that were asked several times by different people, and that way I feel like, you know, I'm answering the most asked questions first, and then I will do another one with some lesser asked questions in the near future. Okay, so the biggest question that I got during the fresh milled sourdough course, whether it be through private message or on the course itself, or whether it was in the course or the fresh milled sourdough Facebook page, was how do I convert my starter to fresh milled flour? And it's as easy as letting that starter get down to just a little bit, like a quarter cup, and just feeding it fresh milled flour and water. It literally is that easy. And what will happen is after you do that a few cycles, it will pretty much be a fresh milled sourdough starter. So if you really want to get like 99.999%, then get it down to the scrapings to where there's just residue of sourdough starter, like not enough that you could scoop out. Feed that with the fresh milled flour and water and let it get active, and then you're good with fresh milled sourdough. But I just fed my all-purpose flour starter. I let it get down to, it was like 1/8 of a cup, and then I fed it up with fresh milled flour, and I've been doing that ever since. It's way more vigorous. My breads are rising so much faster with this starter since I stopped giving it any all-purpose flour. I never, like in the past few years, I would feed it all-purpose flour sometimes, but there was always fresh milled flour fed to my starter. Even though it wasn't like consecutively, I always fed it either one. So I wasn't like only an all-purpose starter that I changed over to fresh milled flour. So it has so many different flours fed to it. But now that I'm only feeding it fresh milled flour, I have noticed a huge difference in how active that it is. Now, one note, if you are switching over, the absorption of the water is different with fresh milled flour. For example, with my all-purpose flour starter, I would feed it 1 cup of flour and 3/4 cup of water to get the consistency that I like. But with fresh milled flour, I have to up that to 1 cup of water because that fresh milled flour just absorbs up that water. So if you want a really stiff starter, then stick with the 3/4 cup of water. But if you want it to be, you know, to where you can scoop it out and pour it, I would do the 1 cup to 1 cup. You could also do like weigh it. I know a lot of people do. I've never weighed what I feed my starter. And I know a lot of people have gotten on to me about that, but that's just the way that I do it. But if you want to weigh it out, it would be more water than flour. So like 100% hydration starter. So you want to match the grams of water to the flour, and maybe even more. So it's just one of those things, you have to play with it to get it to the exact consistency that you want it. So I hope that helps you out. By no means I've had people say, should I throw out my established starter and start a fresh milk starter? Absolutely not. You've put all that work in. Just start feeding it fresh milk flour, and it will take off, and you'll be surprised how active that this starter gets. It will be way more active. Okay, so the next question I have is, how long does it take for bulk fermentation if your room is really on the cool side? So the question was actually like they keep their house like 65 degrees, which we go between 65 and 70, I would say, because when you have a wood stove, it's not, level, it's, and so on average I would say that our temperature is around 67. So I'm just doing an average, and I would call that a cool room. And my bulk fermentation usually takes about 8 hours. In the summer though, it's going to take 4, maybe 6. So 8 to 10 in a cool room, 4 to 6 when it's like really hot and humid in the summer, because we don't use air conditioning. So that give you kind of an idea. That's the big difference. It almost doubles from a warm, humid environment to a cool and dry environment. It almost doubles the time that it takes for my bulk fermentation. So don't like give up on it and say, well, mine's not rising. If you have a really cold house, just give it more time. It will. Even putting it in the refrigerator doesn't stop the fermentation process. It will still rise. It's just really slow. So don't like say, well, it's worthless. Even if you have to let it sit 24 hours. I know people who do that. So if you have to let it sit 24 hours, then let it sit 24 hours, but it will eventually happen. Okay, so the next question is, what do I mean when I say strong starter or mature starter? Does one person asked, does that mean it has more flavor? And it's not really about that. When I say strong starter, I mean the strength of it to rise dough. So the older your starter is, like the longer you have it. So if you've had a starter for a decade, it's going to be exponentially more active and vigorous than someone who has a starter that's 2 months old. And so when I say strong starter, I'm talking about the age of the starter. And you will kind of get to a point with your starter after you've had it, I'm going to say like a year, that it is just, it's kind of at its, it's strong. And so all the way up from the time you start it to like a year, you'll have success with it. It will work. But when it starts really taking off, like getting really strong because you've used it, you've fed it, it's so much quicker, and the bread is so much airier, and the bread products are. And so that's what I mean when I mean strong. It's not really with flavor, but that leads me in to quite possibly the second most asked question that I get about sourdough starter. So I get this question probably once every few days. How can I make my sourdough more sour? And it really, a lot of this has to do with temperature. So you know how we were talking about how long does it take to ferment dough in a cool room? Well, the longer it takes, the more sour that the bread is going to be. Think of it like this. When you feed a sourdough starter, and it's done, it's ate all the flour, and it develops the hooch, the grayish black liquid on top. That is like the byproduct of the fermentation process. And so it's pungent. If you smell it, it's like acetone. It's nail polish remover smell. And that kind of gives you this indication that the taste of that is going to be way stronger than when it has that sweet yeasty smell when it's really active. So what I recommend is, number one, don't use your starter when it's at that smells good, bubbly, active phase. Let it go on the downside, and it's starting to get hungry. You're going to have more of that sour taste. Also, the temperature, like we were saying. You want to ferment that dough at a cool temperature. A lot of times I will make dough and let it ferment for maybe 4 or 5 hours, and I just stick it in the fridge because you just get so much more flavor that way. And plus you get more benefits from it because you can stretch that fermentation process out even into days if you want to. And so if you're in it for the health benefits, for the ease of digestion that sourdough can bring, then the refrigerator's where you want it most of the time. Of course, you're going to do some of your bulk fermentation at room temperature, but if you want to slow it down and get an even stronger flavor and a more gut-friendly bread, then you're going to want to start utilizing your refrigerator. And the way that you can do this, let's say like the bread that we made just last week, and you put it in the refrigerator after you put it in the Banneton basket, you can leave that in there for a couple of days. I mean, just keep an eye on it, because if your starter's like mine, I can't really go like a couple of days. I have to, unless I put it in there, unless I caught the bulk fermentation early and then put it in there, then I can do that. But if I did a really good bulk fermentation and then put it in the Banneton basket in the fridge, I can let it go for like 14 to 16 hours, and then it starts kind of blowing up in the Banneton basket. And really, I need to catch it because I don't want it to lose its, its structure. But if you have a younger starter, you have a lot more flexibility because you can let your doughs ferment for a long time, or if you have a really cool house. So in our house, we have a pantry that is closed off during the wintertime, so it's like a cold room. If you have a room that you don't use really, and you close it off and turn the heat off in there, that'd be a perfect place. If you're really wanting to get intense sour flavor and the best gut health benefits, then I would recommend doing something to that nature, or putting it in the refrigerator. If you have room in the fridge and you can put your dough in there, you can do that as well. But also, you can put, let's just say like cookies. I have a sourdough chocolate chip cookie recipe. You can make that dough up and leave it in there a week. I mean, you can leave it in there literally maybe longer. I mean, I'm sure longer. It's just going to get better and better and more flavor that way. I only say be cautious with your breads, because if you let it go too far, it will start losing structure and you won't get any oven spring. All right, I really went off on that one, but that one's a pretty popular question that I get asked. Okay, so another really popular question is, how long does it take from the time I make a starter until it's ready to bake bread? And I can't really give you like a time, because a lot of this depends on your environment. A lot of it depends on whether you ferment a lot in your kitchen already and you have an abundance of wild yeasts in the air and different things like that. But I'm going to tell you a generalized time frame. So from the time you mix it up day one until you can make a loaf of bread, I'm going to say average 3 weeks, 21 days to a month, let's just say. It's still not going to be big fluffy bread because it's a young starter, but you will get a rise and you can bake with it that way. And I've seen people have really good results after 3 weeks. If you are trying to bake before that, it may take so long to get a rise and it still not be like what you want. But don't be discouraged. What I always advise people to do is, after your starter becomes active after like a week, 7, 10 days, 5 to 10 days, whatever it takes to get it to where it's really active and bubbly consistently after you feed it, I would just use it. Use it in pancakes, use it in crackers, use it in pizza crust, use it in biscuits, in cakes, cookies, pie crust. Use it so you can feed it, because that's what builds your starter up so that you can make the bread. Once you get it to that point, and if all you want to make is bread, then you're good to go. But getting it to that point means you have to use it in other things, like what we like to call discard recipes, which is just hungry starter or young starter. And you can really build a starter up fast if you just start incorporating it in most of your bread recipes or cookie recipes or whatever that you make with flour. You could probably have it ready in 3 weeks to make a decent loaf of sourdough artisan bread. So I hope that helps. Okay, I just got this question yesterday, and it wasn't one that I got a lot, but I got it a few times, and I thought it bears me, talking about this, because I actually have not talked about. And when I read the question, I was like, that's something I've never actually addressed that I remember. Anyway, is sifting fresh milled flour. The question was, does sifting help the rise, or what does it do to the health benefits and things like that? So let's talk about sifting flour briefly. I realize I probably need to do an entire video on this because I've never talked about it. So there are people who find it much easier to work with fresh milled flour if they sift some of the bran and germ out. I understand that. Because it does make the flour a bit more fluffy and not as heavy, because you get some of that heaviness, which is the bran and the germ, out. I don't sift my fresh milled flour. I have, when I first started with fresh milled flour, I did buy one of the special sifters that's just for sifting fresh milled flour so that you can get the bran and germ out. I used it 2 or 3 times, and all that bran and germ, it was really irritating me, because I know there are uses for it, but I just wasn't using it. And so I ended up feeding it to my chickens, and it just seemed like a waste to me. And then doing the research and really digging into it and learning that part that I was sifting out is where all the nutrition is. And so I'm not saying you sift all the nutrition out, so please don't misunderstand me. There's still going to be nutrition in that flour, because you're not going to get every single bit of bran and germ without an industrial sifter. But you are sifting nutrition out of that bread, and a good amount. And so my advice is get comfortable using the whole flour, because if you're in it for the health benefits, you truly are not going to get the full health benefits if you sift the flour. That's just my way of looking at it. It just kind of makes sense to me. But I will say this. If you use your whole grain flour, but you want to sift it for pastries, or you want to sift it for something that needs to be really light and airy, I mean, I don't see that that's a big deal. And like I said, I don't do it. I have, but I don't practice that regularly now, or at all now. But I would say 99% of the time, use the whole flour, and only sift the flour if you need it for like a pastry flour. Now, the second part of the question, does it help with the rise? I wouldn't say that. I've done it both ways, and I would say as long as you soak that flour and kind of soften the bran and germ before you start kneading or stretching and folding, I don't see a big difference in the rise. So that's just my experience with it. Okay, so I have one more question that was interesting to me, and it's something I've actually been thinking about. I hadn't talked about it on here because I haven't done it and don't know when I'll be able to do it, but it's something that I am interested in. The question was, do I have a fresh milled sourdough loaf recipe for a bread maker? I don't have a bread maker, but I have considered going to my Goodwill and looking to see if I could find one, because you can usually find them at all the Goodwills, because honestly people get them and they use them once or twice and then they get rid of them. But I don't have one. I have watched people use them, and from what I understand, you want to put the liquid portion of the recipe in first, then the flour, and then the salt. So you would put your water, your sourdough starter, if you're using oil, honey, egg, whatever, in there first. Pour the flour in, make maybe a little well in the top, and pour your salt. And then, from what I understand, there are many settings. So you can set it to just mix, and you can do that and let it auto-lease after the mix program runs out. And then there's like a knead button, and if you want to use your knead button, knead it for like 10-12 minutes until it's really nice and stretchy, And then there's the option to go into the rise and the bake and all that. So I don't really think it's a ton different than making a yeast loaf in a bread machine. It's just, you may have to, instead of pushing an automatic program, you may have to manually make a program and maybe save it as your favorite. And that way you can just push a button once you get a program that works. So you're going to want to mix, let it sit for 30 minutes to an hour, knead it, and then go to the point where it rises and then it bakes it. I hope that makes sense. That's my understanding. So I would actually have to get my hands on a bread machine to prove that point. And if I get one, you all will be the first ones to see me use it, and we will work out a recipe and I will bring it to the blog. But as of right now, I do not have one. All right, well, those are all the questions that I'm going to answer today. It's going to get very long. And I hope that you all enjoyed the course as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you all. I'm enjoying looking at your all's loaves. Be sure and send them to me either on Instagram or in the Facebook group. And that's all I have for you. Check out my blog. Recently, I've been putting a lot of einkorn stuff on there and sourdough einkorn stuff. As you know, I did the video last week, grain of the week. We'll have another one coming up Thursday, talking about einkorn, and I'm really enjoying making einkorn sourdough stuff and just einkorn stuff in general. So check those out. I haven't got to make videos on all of them yet because I was busy, you know, with the course and things like that. So eventually I will get those recipes over here on YouTube. So all right, well, if you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. And I think that's all I have for y'all. Thank y'all so much for joining me for the Fresh Milled Sourdough course. I will be adding some bonus modules, so be on the lookout for those. And we will see you all next week for a new video.